A few weeks ago we went down to Thorn in Gloucestershire. Like me, you might not be very familiar with the name or the company's varied restoration work, but when you see that it produces this, the Lancia Aurelia B20GT Outlaw, well, I felt instantly compelled to find out more.
We might as well dive straight in. I've arrived at Thorn and the first thing I'm doing is driving this wonderful, wonderful car, which we'll tell you all about in the rest of the film, but I know very little about it. It's actually quite nice because you come to it without any sort of preconceptions. You look at it and you think, well, this is obviously absolutely beautiful, but beyond that, I know nothing more. So here we go. The nice thing is that I know that I'm probably not going to drive this as hard as the owner because he's a racing driver. Obviously, it's going to look tiny out on the road, but compared to a lot of sort of sports car resto mods or something, it feels quite sort of cavernous in here, and so you get all this wonderful noise coming in here and swirling around. The further you get into the throttle coupling, you suddenly get that bass coming in. Sweet gearbox. It looks very bizarre because this is obviously bent around here, but it's pretty intuitive to use. It's just a normal H pattern. The pedals are obviously all perfectly placed because it's a new pedal box down there, so that makes life an awful lot easier. The driving position is great, steering wheel a long way out, legs out pretty straight, so it doesn't feel like an upright sort of little coupe, which perhaps the original certainly does. Rides very well, it's got that lovely loose-limbed feel. Steering is surprisingly direct. It's not fighting you, it's not wriggling your hand, you're not desperately trying to keep it online, it just talks to you really through the steering. It just lets you know where the wheels are wandering while still tracking absolutely straight. So it moves in your hands, you sort of forget that old cars do that. It's wonderful. The biggest thing to get used to from a driving perspective is probably the brakes, just because they're unassisted, so they do need a firm shove. Such a tiny, shallow windscreen. It is a bit like being in a postbox and looking out through a lettuce hole. Some people might balk at having the integrated roll cage in here, but when you're driving this sort of obviously old car, it does just psychologically give you a little bit of reassurance. It means you're happy to drive it harder. What a wonderful little car.
We'll have to take one somewhere sunny and spectacular in the summer for a longer run to do it justice, but we figured it was worth giving you a taste of that very brief and rather unexpected drive nonetheless. Now, however, it's time to find out a bit more about the car from Messrs Thornley and Kellum, starting with Simon Thornley, who explains why Lancia and how the Outlaw project was born from a restoration they undertook on a very special racing Aurelia known as the Baracco car.
When I first drove one, a 3rd series car that a client bought in, and when I got used to it, I just thought, God, this is just incredible. This is a 1953 car. And then I started to read up about them, as is my wont. Then you suddenly realise a number of things. First of all, Lancia is a company in their constant drive for innovation, their engineering-led philosophy. They just go around twisty bits really well, for a start. They're not particularly fast, but they've just got this great balance. I'm not a good driver by any means, Henry, but even I can throw an Aurelia into a corner and feel quite heroic. They're just such an innovative car. Transaxle, inboard rear brakes, 50-50 weight distribution. The world's first production V6 engine. I mean, what's not to like? They're just fascinating cars. With the Outlaw project, it probably began quite a few years ago now. We were asked by a client to look out for a competition B20GT. Difficult to find because frankly Lancia, part of their history is they often destroyed cars at the end of a race season. We heard of what arguably is the most famous B20GT of all, which was Baracco's car, having been found in the States, and we kind of intercepted it, and that turned into actually a real pilgrimage for us in almost every sense. It was in very bad shape, but it is the most illustrious B20GT of all. It's the 10th chassis built. Giovanni Baracco bought one of the early cars, entered it straight away in the Mille Miglia. The car came second overall. This tiny 2-litre brand new car came second to Villarace's 4.2-litre Ferrari, and at one point was less than a minute behind. The legend of the Aurelia was born really then, and then 6 weeks later Liurani had a place at Le Mans but not a car, and Baracco had the car and not the place, so they got together, and in the meantime they quickly painted the car red because Liurani said we can't have an Italian car unless it's red. They came I think 9th overall, and they won their class by a lot, which you can tell I'm quite interested in the Baracco car. We discovered in doing our research the car had been lowered because it turned up for the Pescara race with a lowered roof, altered bodywork. We did a huge amount of research to get this car right and to find all the facts. It's a tiny picture that we found. The car's lowered, and then in here in Italian it explains what they did to the car. And it's Auto Italia, August 1951. And I thought, yes, when I read that. The car subsequently went to the Carrera Panamericana. Last time Bracco drove it and crashed out on the 4th day. Disappeared, find the car, 3.5 year painstaking restoration. And one of the things we did actually was we painted the car black, and then we painted the car red, and then we painted the car black again to emulate what had happened to the car in period. And we took the car to Pebble Beach. I think about 2 months later, a very big Californian collector came here and he said, I don't want to upset you, but have you guys ever thought of doing an outlaw Aurelia? Would you be interested? And after about 0.4 of a second, I said, yeah, that'd be great. And so that was the whole idea was born there.
Time to bring in the other half of the name over the door, Wayne Kellum, to tell us a little more about the engineering details of the Outlaw and what lengths they've gone to in developing it from an original Aurelia.
Behind us then we have an original and the Outlaw.
Yep, completely standard Series 4 and an Outlaw Series 4.
And it's wonderful seeing them, just before we get into the details, it's wonderful seeing them side by side.
I don't think we've done that before, you know, purposely, and the difference is amazing.
So let's get into the differences. We'll start at the front, I suppose, as we're up here. And there's a great story about these, I believe, in terms of
those
nickel plating.
you can buy off the shelf in aluminium, but it's difficult to plate aluminium, so we make them in steel and then we can plate them.
And they are absolutely beautiful.
They're a great thing. I mean, they're on most Ferraris. So it's a 2.5 or 2.8 litre engine. On this car onwards, fuel injection, first car not. And also the transaxle was matched, so it's a Flaminia engine and transaxle, so it's got much longer legs than a normal Aurelia.
Oh wow, look at that, lovely. There's not a lot of room in there, is there? Actually?
No, it's very tight, and that's why they get quite warm. So this is the Flaminia engine, as I mentioned earlier. Copy the V6 from the Aurelia, but it just got more fins, more oil capacity, just stronger bottom end.
In terms of power and torque, what are we sort of looking at? So what did this have, and then what have we got here?
So that would have had 118 brake horsepower. I'm not sure on the torque figures, but this has got 175, 180 horsepower.
So it's a big uplift.
So it's an uplift in cc as well. It's 300 cc's bigger. And then on these two cars, we're going a step further with the engine. We're hoping for just under 200.
Wow.
The suspension, so the damper and the spring were all in a pillar, and the hub slid up and down the pillar. I think Morgan did it originally as well as Lancia. From 1924 to 1958, Lancia used that system. This car has that, but none of the workings. Custom-made nitrogen-charged dampers within the units. So it looks absolutely right. Even the pipework going to it looks right. I find the car really compliant on the road.
And talking about that, the steering, you've changed.
Yeah, so the steering on the first car is a steering box, as was this car, but it was the weak point of the car. The handling of the car was definitely the steering, in my opinion. So we had a company design a rack and pinion steering for it, and it's just much better, much better. The feel's still there, it still feels nice, still self-centers, but it's just much more positive. Four-wheel disc brakes now, big wheelwood calipers, no servo, so you still have to press very hard. And we
noticed that.
Yeah. It was until we messed around with the bore on the master cylinder. It was proper hard work. But now I think now they've got a good feel to them. They do stop nicely, and the tyres make a big difference.
They do, yes.
Make a big difference. These are great fun on Michelin X's, but I wouldn't want to drive this on Michelin X's. One of the things is we cut the wings through there and make much wider wings front and back. So the front wings and the rear wings are something like 50mm wider.
And it's one of those things that sort of you sort of only notice it. Really
yeah, once you put it alongside one, then it's obvious. Without that car here, you'd think, oh, this is a Lancia Aurelia, and it's been lowered. He really wanted an eggplant aubergine colour, so yeah, well, we did. We went and bought one from Waitrose and had it scanned by our paint people, and that's what we did.
It's a wonderful colour because it's
come out really nice.
In some lights you see there's a little bit of purple in there, and then other times it looks that lovely.
People wonder why I think it's black and don't think anything of it, and then they see the sun come round or under a different light in the workshop, it changes colour. It's really nice.
And as we wander around here, just explain some of the things that you've done in here. So for a start, you can see we've got the roll cage.
Yeah, so the roll cage is really quite well hidden, and we decided and took the opinion not to hide the pedal box because it's quite an industrial looking thing, and the whole sort of feel of the car is quite industrial and aggressive. So We just made it look pretty, made some pretty brackets. And
Much smaller steering wheel, obviously. Than
it would be very nice to have a Nardi wheel on there, and we've tried it, but it's just too big. You're just looking at the rim of the steering wheel all the time, so it just doesn't work.
Technically, the Outlaw, we call it the Fuorilegge, because Fuorilegge is Italian for outlaw. He gave us quite a lot of scope to do our thing. He said, look, I want a lowered roof and I'd like it wider and let's do some upgrading and modernisation. But really, a lot of it we created, and the inspiration was definitely doing the Bracco car and understanding about lowering the roof.
So we restored a very famous car, the Bracco car 1010. Although it had been modified from about here back, it had the back of a Ford or a Chevrolet put on it, we could see what they'd done to do the roof lowering. So from that we could tell how they lowered the roof. And so we've kind of started along that route and then made our own decisions somewhere along the line to make it just slightly easier for us, really.
And roughly how many hours of work are we looking at?
They take somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 hours.
Wow.
And they don't seem to be getting any quicker, which we thought they might.
Even throughout this small run that we're doing, and we will never make more than 9, we learned a lot, I think, about Lancia as a company and about how they were continuously innovating and developing. So we tried to build an Outlaw that was still unmistakably Lancia always.
It's fair to point out you don't take a wonderful example. You wouldn't take that for example. Obviously, these are cars that
people wouldn't build the cars that we're doing this to. I mean, it's just non-economical.
They're basket cases.
They're absolute basket cases. They're almost chassis plates, really. They're really bad. If people were to see the start project, I don't think they'd think, okay, fair enough. At least it's back on the road as an Aurelia of some form.
Once you've seen one of these, I don't think there is any at least about it. These are fabulous cars, very much in the vein of what Eagle does with E-Types or what Rot Emery creates with Porsche 356s. Unusual, but curiously attractive, and with a wonderful backstory.
I'm not arrogant enough to say it's what Lancia would have done if they were still here, because they wouldn't be building Aurelias. But I think it is a car that is true to the spirit of Lancia, and that's what we wanted.